welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video where I want to discuss whether I think the IKEA detolf makes a good enclosure for mice or not. So firstly, what is the IKEA detolf? Well, originally it is sold at IKEA as a glass display cabinet, but when you turn it on its side like this, it does make a very large enclosure you can use with your small animals like hamsters and mice. When you assemble the IKEA detolf, instead of using the glass door that comes with it, I do recommend building your own custom lid like the ones you can see behind me. This then transforms it into an enclosure you can use with your mice. If you do decide to use the IKEA detolf with your mice, I do recommend using it alongside another piece of furniture. Like this one behind me, this is the IKEA Calyx. It's the 6-drawer unit and it fits really nicely on top of here. As you can see, the wooden bits on the end do overhang. You want this to happen instead of it resting on the wood because this can cause the glass to shatter in the middle. So does the IKEA detolf make a good enclosure for mice? Personally, I think so. Otherwise, I wouldn't be using it, but there's definitely some pros and cons that come with any enclosure, and the IKEA detolf is no different. So starting with the pros, the first pro that I could think of is that it is a glass enclosure. Not only does this allow you to add more bedding in this than a regular barred cage would allow you to, but it's kind of hard to find bar cages that are big enough but also have small enough bar spacing that your mice won't squeeze out of. So finding a barred cage that is big and has small bar spacing is pretty hard, and you don't have to worry about that with the IKEA detolf. Speaking of large enclosures, as you can see, this one is pretty long, and that's definitely one of the biggest pros of having a detolf as your enclosure because it does give them plenty of space. I think it's about the equivalent of a 90-gallon tank, which is definitely bigger than most enclosures you can get aimed at mice are, so the IKEA detolf is definitely good for giving them so much space. Another massive pro with this cage is the price. It is about £60 in the UK, which is about the price you pay for a smaller store-bought cage, so you do get a lot more enclosure for your money. If you went out and tried to buy a reptile or a fish tank that's about this size, about 90 gallons, you would end up paying a couple of hundred, even £1,000 just to get one this big, so it's definitely a bargain. Another thing I like about the IKEA detolf is it's really good for groups of females. I have 7 girls in here, and although I'm not too sure whether I'd want this many mice again, it's definitely good if you have a larger group or you're thinking of expanding your group and adding a few more. It's definitely a really good enclosure if you have a larger group of mice. Another thing that I personally like about the detolf is the metal bars inside of the cage. Not only do the mice really enjoy climbing up these and kind of pole dancing on them, they're also really good for attaching things within the cage like wooden ladders and bridges and ropes, things like that. Instead of having to attach it only to the lid at the top and then having to pull everything out when you take the lid off, you can attach things to the bars inside, and this does make decorating the cage a whole lot easier. Contrary to popular belief, having a larger cage like this one does not actually make it much more difficult to clean them out. In fact, I personally find it so much easier than having to regularly clean a smaller cage. I don't find I have to clean this one as often because you can put so much more bedding in the base, and this is obviously a lot more absorbent than if you only had a small cage with not much bedding in the bottom. Personally, I don't find it too difficult to clean either. It is relatively easy just to scoop all the bedding out with a dustpan, and it doesn't take too long. A lot of people do assume that having a cage this big is a lot more hard work, and personally I don't think it is at all. Another pro of having the detolf is that it's really good for watching your mice and taking pictures through the glass. A lot of you are probably watching the mice run around in the background whilst I talk to you, and that's a massive pro for me in having the detolf because before they were living in a barred cage and they'd be doing something cute, and by the time I tried to get my camera through the bars to take a picture, the moment had passed and I'd missed the photo opportunity. So having them in the detolf is really good for watching them, and I really love that aspect of it. The last pro that I could think of with the detolf is the fact that it is visually appealing. Obviously this is my opinion, you might think it's really ugly, but I love the detolf for how it looks. Obviously this is the least important thing when it comes to the mice. They don't care how it looks, they just care how it functions, but I personally find it really visually appealing. I do think it fits in really nicely with other furniture, and I don't think it draws away too much attention, especially if you've got it in the main part of your house. Barred cages, on the other hand, I find kind of ugly. Most of the time the base of those are plastic and they come in weird bright colours that don't necessarily fit in with your other furniture, and the IKEA detolf does that really nicely. You can also pick what colour the ends of the detolf are. I did go for white because most of the furniture in my pet room is white, but they do also do black and oak, So if you have oak furniture, you can get one with oak ends, and it will tie in really nicely with the rest of your house. Hi, it's Editing Emmy here, and they don't come in oak. I don't know why I made that up. They do come in black and white though, so just ignore the oak part. So yeah, obviously that one is the least important when it comes to caring for your mice, but I did think it was still worth mentioning. So moving on to the cons, there are a couple of cons with the detolf that may put you off using it. So the first major con is the fact you do have to custom make a lid just to prevent them from escaping. This one that I've got is just made from wood and mesh. Obviously the mesh adds ventilation, but you will have to make some sort of lid just to prevent them from escaping. Luckily there are a few tutorials online to help you build this lid. I'll leave them linked in the description, but you are going to have the tools to do it or someone that can do it for you. Just a side note, my dad helped me make the lid, so thank you Dad, because I am incapable and I would have no ability to do this. Another con of having to make the lid yourself is the fact that if you don't do it correctly, the mice will squeeze between any gaps, speaking from personal experience, so make sure you're doing this correctly and not leaving any gaps between the glass and the lid, because the mice will escape and they will try to find an escape route, so make sure if you're making a lid yourself, you are making sure you're not leaving any gaps. Obviously with constructing the lid comes an extra cost of having to buy all the supplies, like the wood and the mesh, and the staples and like a staple gun. Things like that do come at a price. I don't believe it was too expensive to make this, but obviously that does add to the price of having the detolf as a whole. The detolf itself is relatively cheap, but then you do have to consider all of the added expenses of making the two lids for the top as well. Not necessarily directly linked to the detolf itself, but I have found my mice chew the lid a little bit, so that's also something you have to watch out for. So as I said before, I don't have my own video on how to make the lid. A couple of my friends have made videos on how to do it, and I'll leave their videos linked in the description. One of the biggest cons of the detolf is the depth and the width. The detolf is not very tall, and once you put a decent layer of bedding in there, it doesn't leave much height left for other cage items like wheels and hanging toys or climbing frames. It doesn't leave you too much height to work with. So this can be super frustrating if you want to add lots of bedding for them to burrow in, but also want to give them a decent sized wheel. This is a bit of a struggle, and definitely something I wish could be changed about the detolf is to make it a bit taller. Also, the width of the detolf is very narrow and slim. This does limit what toys you can put in there. Wider toys may not fit in the detolf, which is very disappointing. Another con of the detolf is the fact that it does take up so much horizontal space. You may not have the space in your room to fit a detolf, and personally I find a lot of the vertical space is wasted. There could be so much more going on up here that isn't, so I do recommend if you have a space you're working with and you don't think a detolf would fit, then it may be a better option to custom build your own cage instead. The last con that I could think of with the detolf is the fact the ends are wooden. Some mice are going to be chewers no matter what you do, and one of my mice has chewed one of the ends of the detolf. I'm not too sure whether there's supposed to be like a screw in that end, but there's a little hole they've chewed in that end which I need to sort out, but that's also something to keep in mind if you want to get a detolf. Take a shot every time I say detolf in this video because it doesn't even sound like a word to me anymore. Also, I know some of my Swedish viewers are going to come at me for not saying detolf correctly, but I'm trying my best. So overall, do I think the IKEA detolf makes a good enclosure for mice? Yes, I do, and I can't see myself stopping using it anytime soon. The only time I could see myself possibly not using the detolf in the future is if I had the skills and the space to build a custom enclosure that maybe utilised a bit more vertical space and was a bit more space efficient for the room. Possibly in the future I might consider doing that, but for now I am really happy using the detolf. Overall, I think it's an amazing option for mice if you have the space and you're able to somehow build a lid for it. I definitely recommend you try it with your mice. I do often get asked whether I think it's a good enclosure for more nervous mice, or perhaps a male mouse living all by himself, or a smaller group of about 3 females, and my answer is still yes. Males can really appreciate having all of the space, and of course they still deserve to have a big enclosure as well, and when it comes to more nervous females, you obviously will know your mice best, but I do think it can work for more nervous mice as well. When I first got the detolf over a year ago now, I did only have a group of 3 females. one of which was very nervous, that was Pebble, and she was really nervous when she was living in the bird cage. Whenever I came into the room she would run and hide, and especially if I was opening up the door, she found that quite scary, and I was quite worried about how she would do in the detolf, but it completely transformed her personality and she got so much more confidence living in the detolf. I don't know what it is about the detolf, but from my personal experience they do feel a bit more secure in there, whether they don't view the front bit as like a massive window that everyone can look in. They tend to feel a lot more secure, just from my experience. All of my nervous mice that have started out quite nervous of people are now pretty confident living in the detolf. Obviously I do recommend packing it full of things for them to hide in and not leaving any bare open expanses of space, but obviously you will know your mice best and know whether they'll cope in a big enclosure like this, but I always recommend giving it a go. If you've just got new mice and you're trying to bond with them and tame them and they do seem quite nervous, I do recommend starting them out in a starter cage that you have easier access to, because trying to find a mouse in the detolf can be quite tricky, and I do recommend trying to bond with them initially in a smaller bin cage setup or something before you put them into the detolf if you're struggling to bond with them. But I do think most mice would appreciate having all of the space, and personally to me it's more important that my mice are having a good time in their enclosure and they've got plenty of space, rather than me having a good bond with them and forcing that bond on them. With mine I've kind of trained them to come to the sound of me rattling their treat jar, and they'll come up to a certain wooden platform in the cage, and that's how I then get them out, rather than having to search through the entire enclosure for them. They're kind of trained to come up to a wooden bridge, and then that's how I interact with them, and I don't find it too difficult to get them if I have to in the detolf. So yeah, that is it for today's video. Do you have an IKEA detolf for your mice, or are you thinking of getting one? Let me know down in the comments. And of course don't forget to subscribe to see any more animal content from me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!